Welcome back to Confront Your Mind. I'm Jolynn,
I'm Tiffany. Join us as we talk about how to confront the uncomfortable in life,
while also allowing space for laughter as we learn. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back.
We're still here.
We're still here. Today, we're going to be talking about intrusion, and this is our follow-up for the Intuition podcast, because we're doing part 2. So, intuition versus intrusion, and this week we're going to be exploring more like about intrusion and intrusive thoughts. So Tiffany will start us off with a definition.
Yeah. So intrusive. Well, okay. So an intrusive thought is an unpleasant memory or idea that occurs often in a person's everyday thoughts and keeps him or her from thinking about other things. Mm-hmm. And I like that definition too, because I like that it says keeps from thinking about other things. Like, it's very, like, that just feels intrusive, you know. It's like, this is the only thing it's consuming, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the way I think of it. And then it also, I found something that says intrusive thoughts often elicit feelings of guilt, shame, embarrassment, and or fear. So all of those are bad things, obviously. Like, that's inarguable. And so that's a good, a good way to point it out. Like, it's going to bring bad feelings.
Yeah, that's a really good way.
They're harmful.
Mm-hmm.
Intrusive thoughts are harmful.
I like that it talks about everyday thoughts, like as if, like, which is good because it goes to show, like, on the normal, like, on average, like, our brains are functioned to, like, be helpful and to be supportive.
Yeah.
And, like, intrusive thoughts disrupt that piece.
Yeah. So how do you experience intrusion? Great
question.
Let us know.
So my experience with intrusive thoughts probably comes more in the form of anxiety. No surprise there that I have anxious tendencies, but anxious thoughts. And I know, like, on the podcast, I've talked about, like, those what ifs thoughts that I have. Like,
yeah.
Especially when I was, like, younger, I talked a lot about, like, those, like, what if I'm not good enough? What if they don't like me kind of thoughts? Mm-hmm. And that is, like, those are those intrusive thoughts that are, like, not helpful. There, and, like, even more so too, like, I have those, like, crazy intrusive thoughts that are, like, very scary too, where it's like, you're like,
I'm sorry, it's not funny okay,
but I mean, it's true. Like, I don't want to, like, skip over that intrusive thoughts can also be very harmful, and, like, can be that, like, very scary part of, like, oh, like, you could, like, I don't know, like, when you're chopping up onions and it's like, what if, like, my hand slipped and I chopped off my finger? Like, that's, like, really freaky to think about. Like, that would be an intrusive thought. But also those intrusive thoughts can be just like, well, what if I'm not enough? Or what if, like, I, like, shared something I shouldn't have shared? And, like, they're, like, the thoughts that cause panic. They're the thoughts that cause anxiety. Mm-hmm. For me, they're really loud and they demand my attention. Like, that's never just, like, a little gentle, like, what if? Like, it's a very much like, oh my God, what if?
That's a really good point. Like, it doesn't feel like a gentle guiding, like we talked about with intuition.
Exactly. Like, I'm not ever, like, gonna be chopping an onion and just being, what if I chop my finger off?
It's normally paired with, like,
no, it's like, oh my God, what if I chop my finger off? I could do that right now because I have a knife in my hand. And it's like, I wasn't scared before, but I'm scared now.
I did that while I was chopping an onion, though.
Oh.
And so for me, that would be based in logic, but it would also be based in fear.
Yeah. Well, it's like,
And I'll tell you, it's not a good time.
No, I've done that with a mandolin before.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that hurts so bad. Oh, I thought I was gonna bleed out, and then
then you didn't.
And then I didn't. So still here. But do not ever get a mandolin cut if you can help it. They have things that, like, you're supposed to stick into the, like, whatever you're cutting. I didn't do that. So I don't want to say I deserved it, but I definitely didn't prevent it.
But what's helped you with it?
Yeah. So I think just knowing that difference has been one of those big helping factors because like I talked about in intuition that in the intuition podcast I talked about how intuition is that gentle loving voice for me. It's like that piece of understanding in my body, whereas intrusion is very much like, hey, like, just so you know, like it's like that loud like screams like it's made to distract me. It's made to pull me out of like a place of peace. And so I think knowing the difference has been really helpful. But one thing that has also been really helpful for me in working through intrusive thoughts, and kind of just like, not like just being like just taking away any like sort of like reason they may have, is this DBT skill that me and my first therapist worked on called radical acceptance. And at first, like, it sounds really simple in theory, and it is simple in theory, but I think it's a lot more difficult to practice because radical acceptance is like accepting life and situations for what it is and what they are, and just being like, yep, that happened. And just, I think it's more of like that past tense kind of thing where it's like when you leave a friend group or you leave like from hanging out with people and you're like, oh my God, what if they like saw like my panty line when I was wearing leggings? I don't know. I worked out last night and that's like something that I was thinking about. And I was like, what if they saw that? And like, it's like, why does that matter? Like, and if they did, like,
everybody wears them.
Everybody wears them. Not everybody.
I was gonna say not everybody does, but it's not a crazy thing to do.
Exactly. It's just those like silly thoughts where you're like, and who cares? Like, I don't care. Like, good. I'm glad I wear underwear. Like, like, okay. But I know that's like was a weird definition.
Sorry. What happened?
But it's also like I don't know, like, I mean, I think DBT skill radical acceptance is like being able just to accept situations for what they are and just be like, no, like, I went and worked out and I don't know what people think of me or how they're assessing me.
Like focusing on the facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. We've the facts versus feelings podcast, like we talked about.
Yeah.
That was a good one. Which reminds me a lot of radical acceptance. It's just like being able to be present and just be like, yeah, that's not like, that's not like the what ifs aren't true. They're not real. So it's like, let's stay grounded in what is true and like what is real and like what can I accept and just let it be. And like kind of does not make space for those like what if thoughts.
Yeah. Which
is really helpful when dealing with intrusive thoughts because like even when I'm chopping an onion, it's like, okay, but I'm not going to do that. Like I have self-control. Like I'm not going to like stab myself with a knife while I'm cutting an onion, and just because I have that thought doesn't mean that like I'm like crazy or like, and I don't like using that word, but like doesn't mean that like I'm messed up.
There's anything wrong with
yeah,
you. Yeah,
exactly. Thank you. And that's why I like radical acceptance because it's accepting things for what they are in the moment. And that's a lot of how we dismiss intrusive thoughts because intrusive thoughts are not present thoughts. They're like predicting or they're past and they're not helpful. And so I really like to say like intrusive thoughts scare me, but intuitive thoughts guide me. So it's like, it's kind of literally like goes down to that base voice level of like intuitive thoughts are like very gentle and quiet for me, whereas intrusive thoughts are very loud and demanding and like annoying. So
yeah.
But that's my experience like with intrusion and intrusive thoughts. What about you, Tiff?
For me, kind of like you're saying, like I feel like it's always been something that like evokes fear and anxiety. And I feel like whenever I'm thinking that way, I feel like it's normally like I've noticed a difference between intuition and intrusion in the way of like when I'm feeling good and happy and calm, I tend to like hear those intuitive thoughts and like feel those intuitive feelings. But then whenever I'm already like, it's like that negative feedback loop kind of, because it's like when I'm already like feeling down and feeling sad or, like feeling anxious, then I tend to just have more of those like intrusive thoughts or like, intrusion showing up.
I like that you said that it also can be a lot based on like mood and state of mind.
Yeah. Like I feel like, intuition like can kind of like it's easier to feel whenever you are feeling good, but like it kind of can be like present all the time, your intuition. But as far as like, whoa, as far as sorry, as far as like intrusion, it's more so like when you're not feeling well and when you're in a place of like a little bit more like mental instability or something like that. So that's what I noticed. And then I also noticed that, kind of like we were talking about, like the way that you were saying like how it feels, or like how it feels like that voice is speaking to you. Like I feel like I feel it more physically. And so like if I pay attention, like it's like whenever I'm thinking a really bad thought or an irrational thought or an intrusive thought, I tend to like either like feel like my heart rate accelerate, or I tend to like notice that like I'm holding my breath, or like I'm breathing more shallow and I'm not relaxed. Like I can just feel the tension in my body. And so that's something that I try to, that's kind of the way that I've learned to help me differentiate, is like, how do I feel right now? Like if my body is like tense and like that thought makes me feel that way, that's probably not, like not an intuitive thought, because intuitive thoughts, like I talked about in the last episode, like there's been times where intuitive thoughts have told me, hey, maybe like you shouldn't be close to this person, or maybe you should take a step back, but I don't feel like, it doesn't make me feel bad, you know what I mean? Like I'm like, oh yeah, that feels right. And so I think that's kind of the difference as far as the way I feel things. And just like you were saying with therapy, like we both have really benefited from therapy, but like therapy has been really helpful for me, because I also feel that a lot of my the intrusion that shows up, or intrusive thoughts, are from like past experiences that I have not yet processed. And they come from that place of like, what if this happens again? Or like, what if, what if I have to go back to like something like this or whatever? And so like, just like in therapy, reprocessing through different techniques, like just, like just talking about it, or sometimes with the brain spotting, like has been really cool. But like processing something, and even just talking with like my therapist through, her explaining something, and explaining like something about someone, or something about a situation that I didn't know. And like that learning, that educational piece of it can be really good too, because then it explains kind of what was actually going on versus like the way that you felt in that moment. And kind of can also explain your feelings and why you were feeling that way, and gives reason to it. And that has really helped me to kind of, once I can process something, I feel like it takes away that power and like that those intrusive thoughts that come from it. So that's something that has really helped me, is just like reprocessing and processing things that I held on to and never processed. And then I feel like less intrusive thoughts like come from the past.
That's good. Yeah. I had never thought about how brain spotting or EMDR could help with that. But when you said that, it makes a lot of sense to me, because it does help you reprocess it in a way where you leave it in the past.
Yeah. And you don't like just hold on to it and continue to let it,
fester.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that is like, I guess that's a good way to put it, is like intrusion is like this festering wound in a way, like, because it's like that scab that won't heal because you keep picking at it.
Yeah. And I think sometimes intuition can come from like a past experience, but sometimes we have a past experience that could be negative that you learned something helpful from or good. And so I think like it's a good thing to point out that like sometimes when something bad happens, like there are parts of it that you need to, that you clock, and you're like, okay, like I'm going to remember that in that database that we talk about. Like it's in that database, and that's a good thing, because it's like, it is going to protect us in the future. But the thing about intrusion, or it becoming an intrusive thought, is whenever you're letting it, like when you're living in fear just because like this one thing happened, then those what ifs come, and you're like, okay, what if this happens again? What if this, what if that? Whereas with intuition, if it's something from the past, I feel like we talked about last week, like it's more rational. And so it's going to feel rational to maybe, okay, this is a really similar scenario, and it actually is, and let's not let this happen again, versus like maybe setting boundaries or something like healthy like that. versus
intuition
like
guides boundaries.
intrusive being like, you know, like I need to cut this off right now because like it slightly reminds me, you know, like I don't know how to explain what I'm saying.
That's a really good way to put it. Like it's like I think, well, it's in what you have next. Important things to remember about intrusion is that intrusion feels intrusive.
Yeah. Like you're not going to feel good or calm or informed by that thought. You're going to feel freaked out,
panicked.
and it's going to be a stressful thought, and it's going to provoke that anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely.
And panic.
Panic is like something big that I think comes up with intrusion is like, you know, it's like, and it's when you can't stop it from intruding. So that's definitely one of those things where it does not feel good.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, they're not really based in fact at all.
Yeah. And it just kind of it can often come from, just like a very large fear that you have. And kind of like we talked about it with intuition, like how we talked about disconnecting, you know, too much. I feel like almost in the same way, like kind of how I was talking about, like whenever you avoid like thinking about something and you try to like push it down and you don't want to like confront it.
Confront your mind. Every time we say confront, we should say confront your mind.
But you know, you don't want to confront some of these like things that happen in the past, or some of these like thoughts that you frequently have because they're bad thoughts. But then it again, like it just becomes that negative loop where like it's not going to go away if you don't confront it. And that's something that I had to learn in therapy, is like sometimes like you have to confront these things that like you really, which is like part of why like we talk about what we talk about. Like there are some times where like you have to confront something in order for it to like be silenced or for it to go away. And I feel that way a lot about intrusive thoughts, because it's like sometimes you know, you don't want to think about something so much, and so you're like, nope, I'm not going to do that. But you don't realize that like it's manifesting itself and like festering, like you were saying. It's manifesting itself. It could be manifesting itself in your daily life, and you're not even realizing it. And so it's so important to, you know, work through those things and those fears that you may have. Yeah,
I think I might have said this a couple weeks ago, but like my husband, like we were talking about like my anxiety and like my anxious thoughts, and I was like, I focus so much on having like a good night, because my anxiety comes up a lot at night. And I was like, I focus so much on having a good night. Like I just want to have a good night where I don't get anxious, I don't have like any panic. And like he's like, yeah, you do like focus on it a lot, but like you're focusing on having a good night so much that you're still focusing on the fact that you've had bad nights, right?
And really you're focusing on not having a bad night.
Exactly. And that's what he was saying. He was like, by trying so much to force this good night, you're trying to force the opposite of what's happened, and you're still thinking about it, and it's consuming your mind. And it's like, that's why I think it's so important to be like more aligned with your intuition, because intuition is very present. And that's what, like, I mean, like we said last time, Brianna Wiest and The Mountain Is You is where we pulled a lot of like this inspiration from. And just even some of the like quotes from her book about intrusive thoughts and intruding thoughts. And one of them is that intrusive thoughts are triggered by external stimuli. It's often like those triggers from your environment that feel like very demanding of your attention. Like another one is that intrusive thoughts demand reaction and like feel very intense.
Yeah, it's like that. They trigger like that fight or flight reaction.
Right.
It's like, I have to do something right now.
I've got to. It's like you were saying, it's like, I have to cut this person off like right now. It's like, it's like, okay, like let's slow down. Like, yes, like probably, but like,
it's not like right now. Like it's not a survival
right. Like you don't have to text like that person and be like, oh, it's over, I'm never talking to you again. Like just in the moment that you feel it, like you can also like give yourself time to like listen to your intuition and know how you want to respond.
Yeah. And that's that panic you were talking about. Like it feels like a moment of panic where you have to do something right now.
Yeah. Well, it's like, and that's another thing she points out, is that intruding thoughts are hectic and fear inducing and are often irrational too. Like there is no reason, and there is absolutely no need that you ever need to respond to something immediately. Like, I mean, except for like those crazy emergency situations.
I know I was thinking too logically about that, but I get what you're saying.
Like a lot of the times, like especially with anxiety, like you know, that panic.
It makes you feel like it has to be like a now or never thing. You have a minute to breathe and think through it. And often I feel like if you react immediately to things, like you don't, not you, but like you don't do very well with that.
No,
you know, it doesn't really
do well with it,
cause a great, you don't, and the general you doesn't.
The general you. Yeah.
But yeah, and those thoughts, another thing is that she says is intrusive thoughts are closed off. So where we talked about intuition being open-minded and like open to the idea that there might be more to it, or you know, I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say, but they're closed off and they're like, you know, this is the only possibility.
Yeah.
I think
if she said anything more about it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's hard to do this with a mic in my hand. Okay, it says invasive thoughts close your heart and make you feel stuck or condemned.
Wow. That's such a good book.
It's so good.
I feel like I need to reread like the whole thing.
That's what I'm doing.
Because I did audiobook and that was actually really good too.
Yeah.
But
I also got the workbook too.
Ooh.
Yeah, we should do the workbook together.
We should.
That'd be fun.
Let's do it.
Okay. But yeah. Another part she pointed out is that I think I already said this, but it's like irrational. Like
yeah. Whereas intuition is based in rational thought.
Right. Like intuition is based on that survival instinct of like I'm cutting an onion to have food, whereas intrusion is like what if I like cut myself, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
That's a really good point of thinking of like why you're doing something in a healthy way rather than thinking about like, well, what if something bad happened with it? Like think about what good is going to come out of it. And that's a great example because like you're chopping the onion to feed yourself and to make a fun meal and to
onions smell like really good when they're being cooked.
Yeah, that's true.
And then another part is that she said that invasive thoughts, intrusive thoughts create the me versus them mentality. And so it really does, like going back off of what you said with the closed off, it really does isolate you and like trap you in like this space where you're uncomfortable and you don't feel good.
Yeah. Well, back to the definition saying, you know, that it elicits feelings of guilt, shame, embarrassment, and or fear.
Full circle, baby.
Full circle.
But, all right. But yeah, so that's intrusion.
So let your intuition be the guide.
Yes.
Let intuition go over intrusion.
Yes. Listen to the gentle voice and not the loud voices. Take time to discern the difference and give yourself grace when you don't know the difference. Because we're all learning.
Yeah. And hey, don't be afraid to get confrontational this week.
Keep it cute until we meet again. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for being here. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's do a high five this time.
Okay. Yeah.